Hey Addicts, welcome back to another manga review. This time we're going to be looking at Alita Volume 6. But before we get into that, I just want to make a quick correction from the last video. I did say that the kid that was introduced, Kimoi, still probably saying that wrong. I said that it was the child of Shimura and Ito, but that's not true. In the first or second volume, we did get to see this child before, and it was there that we figured out that it was the child of the bartender or the owner of Kansas. So just wanted to make that quick correction there. It was brought up or brought to my attention by a user in a comment in the last video, so just wanted to correct myself there. But with that being said, we're going to jump into Alita Volume 6. So I'm going to be reading through my notes. If this video is longer than 15 minutes, I will be putting tiny steps down in the comments, so if you're wanting to get to a specific part of this review or video or whatever, just look down there and I'll try to help you out as best I can. So with that being said, we're going to jump into this. So it takes place shortly after the last volume. We do get a little bit of a skip, just seeing us in the factory now, and Alita in the factory. And I'm going to be going through real fast, so I'm not going to put a lot of detail in this. But basically, Alita gets sentenced to be disposed of by the factory for a Class A offense of possession of a firearm. We, had that information thrown at us in the last volume, so this comes as no surprise. Just facing the consequences of doing that action. And while Alita's kind of in the disposal center, her brain's starting to shut down. So on her kind of deathbed, we get her approached by a Zalemite for a special mission. We figure out that Kimji, or like the little squishy that Alita had always had by her side, was actually a spy for Zalem. So that's how they've been keeping tabs on her, and how they figured out about her excellent fighting ability, and that's why they want her, which should become as no surprise because she's a complete badass in the series so far, and I can see why they want somebody that kicks so much ass. But we get to see that if she does accept this offer, she'll be in a tuned unit 1 given the name A1, which the agents of this special unit are currently tasked to capture the escaped scientist Desti Nova. So we get confirmation there that Desti, I guess, has bad rep with even Zalem, so that's why he's down in or at least he was down in the scrapyard. We get to see Alita wanting to see Ito again, obviously, so that's part of the reason why she accepts it's the main reason why she accepts this proposition, but also she wants to see how far believing in herself can get her. So after we get that, transitioning, the Zalem saving her and her getting introduced into that unit, we get a look at Vector. He's still alive and kicking, and he's having some trouble with bandits hitting his caravans, and he's afraid that they'll mess him out of his brokering market. Now, these bandits are important, at least for this volume, so we are going to be discussing a little bit about them in this information we get. So the Barjacks, that's the name of this group of bandits. They're mobile bandits that travel around hitting different caravans or trains of product that are going to or from Zalem, or the factories and the farms. We get information that they've been around for 5 years, so we don't know if there's a time skip in between this volume. There isn't any said, but it does kind of imply that there has been a good amount of time that's passed since the last volume. So this could be that they've been around for 2 years before Alita even became, or I guess I should say before Ito found Alita in the scrapyard, or more likely we're seeing another 2 year time skip. So I guess we'll see if the later volumes really touch on that, but just so far that's the information we get on the timeline of this. These bandits are also prominently working in the southern section, or the sector. They even stole a factory train, which, a little bit of foreshadowing there for the later. And then they also only know this one piece of information about the leader of these bandits, and it's that their name is Din. I almost butchered that completely. Moving on, though, we get to see Vector does glimpse Alita in a crowd as he's kind of up in his penthouse or his little office. And again, just like I said, apparently it has been a while since the factory caught her. But we do get a little hint drop that guns are going to become a bigger factor, and we definitely do see that in the later volume. So I was right when I wrote down that note, because we just get it in passing. But moving on, we get to see a new character actor actually introduced, and it's when we're seeing a bit more about how the factory works, them hiring mercenaries for their trains and their caravans, to protect the cargo. And it's at this that we're introduced to the character Figure 4 at one of these hiring stations, and he is a regular human, has no cyber enhancements, and as he's getting hired on, he does have this scuffle with this cyborg, and we see that he is able to take out the cyborg barehanded. So there's some cool stuff with that gets later revealed, but just know that he's no slouch, even though he's not a cyber. So we get to see a skip. At this point, we really do see Figure as the primary person we're seeing the story through. He's kind of like the, I guess, the main protagonist for this section of the volume. Because it's kind of not from his perspective, but we're kind of following him. So we get to see him on the factory train where he just got hired at, seeing him learn more about the job, we get more info on his personal details. I'll put an image of that up. And then we also get to see him meet this other mercenary that's been on the train for a while named Youre. I almost screwed that up. And he has a family that is on farm 22. And the only reason why I say that might sound like throwaway information, but it does mean something later in the volume. So with that being said, they're on the train for a while, and Figure wants to get some fresh air, wants to see the scenery, so he goes up top of the train and finds Alita, and this is where, obviously Alita is reintroduced into the story, and he hears her playing this beautiful song on the harmonica. We get a little moment of them meeting up and kind of exchanging some small shared words. You get to see a little bit of the old Alita, how she acted, and her childish side, but you also do get a glimpse of what toll the misery she's gone through has done to her as well, because she is a bit hard or kind of cold in the later part of their discussion. But it's when this conversation gets cut short by bandits approaching the train. So that kind of leads to everybody going on battle station, and Alita is taking point in terms of command, because I guess she is the highest ranking on the train. But just one little side note, I do like how the equipment works for the mercenaries for the train. It kind of looks similar to maybe some equipment or weaponry that the Space Marines use in Aliens, so I like that. But also it has this thing where it only disengages the gun when the train or the people running the train give them access to it. So, obviously they can't, take over the train themselves. And there's also an exploding collar so that if they abandon their posts, they'll just be killed. So I do like that. It's at this point that the bandits are close enough that and they've set traps too. So the train gets derailed, throws a lot of people off of the train that, the mercenaries and whatnot. This is where the tension really ramps up for the first big fight of the volume, because not only are the bandits approaching and they have a good amount of people, but because the mercenaries were from the train, they're having to hurry back before their collars explode, from them being identified as being abandoners or deserters. And the bandits, obviously, some of them are cyberized, so they're not all human, even though that they kind of appear to be at first, this being with one of the more prominent characters for this volume, and the leader of this section of bandits called Knucklehead. Kind of gives me a Terminator vibe, but that may be just because it reminds me of a Terminator comic I have. But anyway, we get to see Alita Alita, man, how many times have I said Alita wrong in this volume already? Oh boy. So Alita comes to the rescue. She's definitely more crazed, living up to her new title of Angel of Death. That's kind of like what the people have been giving her. And she is definitely, this is where you see I guess the first instance of Alita being very different. You know, in the other volumes, we hadn't really seen Alita enjoy in the extent that hasn't enjoyed fighting, or maybe not enjoy fighting is the right word, enjoy killing. Let me put it that way, because you know there has been some things that serve the purpose of her fighting, or you know obviously she's just a combatant, so she likes fighting, but it's kind of really twisted in a sense because she looks like she like fully crazed and enjoying killing all these people. So that's probably the biggest turn, or at least seeing Alita in this moment. I do love Alita in a moment that I'm going to pop up on screen. Don't remember exactly, I just wrote it there, so you'll see it there. But we get to see that Alita does end up capturing the leader, Knucklehead, like I mentioned, and gets to take out the rest of the bandits. The train engine was damaged, and there's no way to undo the rent-a-guns that the mercenaries have. So Alita kind of goes against her orders from the Zalamite that approached her earlier, and she goes back for them, saves Figure and youre by hacking into their rent-a-guns and you know getting them away from the blast radius of the train. Alita gets a call from the Zalamite, like I mentioned, and the name, she says Bigot, she calls him Bigot, and I feel like, you know, that was more of like an insult, like she was being, you know, just confrontational or just frustrated, so she's called him that, but I think that's actually his legit name, so if that is his legit name, that's hilarious, but, you know, I guess we'll just call him that from here on out, but, he tells her to continue on with the main mission, or I guess the main objective, and they have a clue to who is behind the bandits, these barjack bandits, and that being Dusty. So, and they said this is the first time they have any information on him in years. So again, another indicator that the timeline has moved, probably by years between the last volume and this volume. But we get to see that Alita tells Figure that she's leaving, and you know, he can't accept that, so he's got to have a sparring match for her. Because at this point, they've kind of been traveling a little bit. They're settled for the night, and she's gonna, you know, she's tasked to moving on with her mission, but that means leaving them, and he's, you know, again, not up for that. So they spar, and this is kind of where Figure shows Alita his power, and this is the power that, you know, when we first got introduced, it's what allows him to go up against cybers. It's like an anti-cyber Kopo, or martial art, for me not saying the, you know, the actual term wrong, but it's called Herza Haun, I don't know. I'm terrible. These are translated from like German or something like that, so not going to be very good with it. But I do like how it basically works like Hammond, or at least it looks like Figure is inhaling before he does his attack. So I just find that funny. But obviously, Alita wins that confrontation, and she leaves them behind, but she ends up coming back to save them when the director Bigot tells her that there's a storm in the area, so she goes back to save them. And in this process, they do get away from the storm, but or they do survive the storm, but they are caught up in it, so that leads them into some predicaments. They end up losing Knucklehead's little head that Alita had saved for interrogation, and Figure kind of leaves Alita tied up so that she doesn't run off again. They find food that doesn't have implications later, I guess, even though they kind of allude it to, but I don't know, maybe we'll see that tie up later. But we get to see as Alita is kind of, you know, hanging there as a captive, if you will, opens up to Figure, and, you know, he tells her where she's from, or where he's from. and you know, again, kind of see some glimpses of the old Alita. You kind of see that she is kind of a hopeless romantic, and Figure is kind of dense and tactless to get the hints. So, you know, that little interaction there, it's cute. It kind of fits into Alita's childish behavior, but it is still a little weird to me. But we get to see that the bandits in this area, this is actually kind of like a base for them. So they were able to find Knucklehead's head, and then you get to see the leader of the bigger bandit unit or part, I guess. And his name is Basil, which one gripe I will say just right off the bat in the volume, not to interrupt the recap too long, but they don't really tell you the names of these characters until long after they're introduced, and it is frustrating when I have to tell this because in my notes, obviously I don't go back and edit every little part that I put in there. So having to remember that, or you know, showing their name up later in my notes, it's like frustrating for somebody in my position. But needless to say, the bandits are on their move, and the one thing I do like about Basil is that he's not dim-witted. He does have a tacticianer's mind, which we learn why a little bit later. But we get to see that they're not going to waste any chances. So they decide to strike first, and that's when another skirmish kind of breaks out. There is some really cool soldiers in this. I kind of like, I don't know if this is what they were going for, but I do kind of like the play on, you know, all these soldiers. You know, sometimes soldiers are referred to as jarheads, and in this they're screw heads. So I don't know. I don't know if that's really meant to relate at all, but I just found that funny. But I think they are really cool the way it kind of works. It really fun sci-fi stuff, needless to say. But we get to see Alita getting in that killing frenzy again, and Figure calling her out on it. And we get to see that Alita used to use fighting as a way to find out about herself, but now it's more of an escape for her, and you know, enjoys the I guess the thrill of kind of losing yourself in it. So it is kind of sad to see Alita kind of corrupted in a way. But it does make sense, and I think the way they present it in the volume is done pretty well. But we get to see, on the other hand, Figure, we get to see his side of what he thinks of this too. That, you know, he loves fighting, or likes a good fight, but hates warfare, you know. And I think, you know, that's something that, yeah, they are kind of two different things. So, and he especially hates it when women do it. So, you know, there is that as well. So adding another layer of beef between him and Alita. But we see Alita does tense up when Figure mentions Your's family and him not being like her. And I think this is not only from her losing everyone that she's kind of come close to at this point, but also probably because of how everyone treated her in the last volume of being like a monster. And so it's kind of like, you know, not the same words being thrown back at her, but in the same vein, it's kind of, I think, triggering that memory. And also just the fact that she doesn't have anybody to really keep her from going on this path. So just a little side note, but just wanted to make that. Also, I apologize because I thought I muted everything. But anyway, we get to see Alita taking out more soldiers, and you know, that swarm to her position because she accidentally freaks out by this butterfly. And I don't remember the significance of this, so if you remember, do comment. I know it's significant. I know we've seen it before, but I just can't place it right now. But needless to say, she's going psycho again, and it leads to a badass fight. And not to say I'm glad that Alita's turned into a killing machine. I really hope that she does turn around, but I can't lie, it's freaking cool looking. I mean, she's scary in this volume. But we get to see Figure asking himself what freedom really is. And after stating that, goes back to help Alita, and Youre gets kind of kidnapped or kind of pulled to the side when, you know, after Figure leaves. But I do like I'll put it up there so you guys can read the page. But I really do like the emphasis on freedom and how it does connect. Again, it's not like a big thing, but you know, it just ties into like some of the motivations that characters have. And I do like the philosophy that it adds to figure, given that we know of his lifestyle and his personal life. But you know, we get to see Alita rocking some new gear, which I didn't touch on this, but she does have a really cool new body. That was one thing that I was looking forward to, you know, just because sci-fi, like, I mean, they can come up with such cool gadgets, and so it's really cool seeing all the stuff that they give her in this volume. But also, she's got a cool butterfly staff. It looks like a butter knife. It looks like a butterfly knife, but you know, obviously in staff link. So that's really cool. I guess every Angel of Death needs her kind of scythe. So digging that. We get to see the Colonel showing up to corner Alita because he, again, is a tactician, so he had a decoy set up so that he can, I guess, flank her and catch her off guard. And in between this, we get some comic relief with Knucklehead, which I appreciate because it's in there and it serves its purpose and it's not too much. You know, it's just in passing. So I like the use and delivery of that. And then we get Figure coming to save the day. And Alita is about to get to the Colonel when youre pops up and distracts her just long enough so that Basil can get her surrounded. And youre explains his reasoning for going on, you know, about toughness and bravery and what freedom could he have if he doesn't have either of those two things, and saying that he'd rather be a slave, which does pair up to a conversation that Figure and Alita had in a earlier part of the volume, which I'll put up there. I really do like that moment and how it connects as well. But we get to see the bandits shooting the building behind Figure and burying him in rubble. Alita thinks that, you know, he's dead, which, spoiler alert, he's not. I mean, they wouldn't just set him up to kill him now. But Alita goes berserk again, kind of acting a little too hasty, gets her legs shot off, and youre kind of feeling sorry about what might have happened to Figure. And then we get a little moment between youre and Basil talking. This is when we get some background on Basil as well as the Barjacks. I'll put that up there so you guys can see that. And it turns out that Basil and the Barjacks are hitting the Farm 22, which is where youre's family is. So we get kind of left on a cliffhanger of where that conversation is going, but we do get, I guess, confirmation on how that went later in the volume. We get to see that, you know, obviously Figure did not die. He comes out of the rebel and he's like, I'm ready to kick some ass now. And the bandit convoy is on the move, and at this point they're wanting to ask some questions for Alita. And Alita kind of rationalizes this and starts, you know, talking. And this makes a lot of sense because, you know, if her job is to keep, you know, in touch with Zalem and keep up to date, that, I mean, it's kind of makes sense that she would make that rationale. And then also, if she has a chance of learning information about Dusty, this is kind of the best way to do it. So do like that moment as well. And we get to see that she learned some info. It does pay off. She learned some info about not only Dusty, but also Ito. And so I do like her rationale in this moment too. I mean, granted, it is not it's not the smart decision, but you know, it just kind of shows how fragile Alita is in this moment. Even though she, you know, is crazy and she's a badass and all these things, you know, just going to show, you know, how much Ito is her weakness. And I do like, you know, the softer side to Alita because, you know, you really can't have somebody that's super hard all the time, you know. Mostly the people that put on a hard front are the people that are the softest in that regard. So it's at this point that we do get the not necessarily big reveal, but we get Knucklehead making his move against Basil and the bandits, betraying them, not only for humiliating him on using him as the decoy, but also just wanting Alita all to himself. And at least he was smart about it. He makes up plans to, you know, sabotage the screwheads, you know, jam or mess with the weapons that they're using as well. And Knucklehead explains himself, and while this exposition is kind of unnecessary, I do like how it kind of paints him as, you know, he's kind of like the end product of the path Alita is headed on, because he kind of shares that same ideal or just philosophy that she has at the moment about fighting and killing. So I do like that. It ends up being, not much in terms of, making Knucklehead important, but I do like how it reflects on Alita's case. But we get to see Figure. This is when he comes back right at the nick time and quote unquote saves Alita. Alita, is not really in a dire situation. We've seen her in worse, so I had no doubt that she would have been able to take out Knucklehead. But this is kind of a moment for Figure to shine and come back. Which she's so happy she tries to kiss him. So that's weird, but also kind of cute, I guess. But Basil shows back up. He didn't quite get killed from when Knucklehead shot him in the face. Don't know how that works, but plot. And we get to see that he had also made Zorg, or Yorg. I'm sorry, I just wrote a typo on mine. Yorg is a screw soldier now, but Yorg doesn't become a traitor for the second time, so he actually turns on Basil, which leads to him kind of getting mortally injured. Alita takes care of Basil for good. And just as a side note, I do want to say, I definitely... obviously, these bandits do share some bad guy traits to them, but overall, I don't think they're necessarily bad guys, so to speak. Their cause is good anyway. So that leads me to think, if Dusty was out of the equation and, if the leader turns out to be not that bad, I think Alita may even potentially join them or have a reason to join them, because their cause does seem... very noble. But anyway, we get to see the two make their goodbyes to Yorg, and then they head out in the wilderness. Definitely a love or a romance blooming between the two. And, there's a whole little moment that's not necessarily important with them, being almost on the verge of death in the desert and then getting the rain. But the last thing that's of importance is that we get to see a flash, or not a flashback, but we get to see happening at the same time in Salem with Director Bigot talking to a new doctor named Russell, who says to go and rescue them. So we know that they're still going to be connected to Alita in the next volume. But this is where the volume ends, and I know it's already past 20 minutes, so I'm going to keep this quick on my final thoughts. I do have a bit, though, so we're going to try to move through this fast. I really like the direction of this volume, and they fix a lot of the pacing, I think, in this volume as well. It's got a really fast, great action in it. I think it's spread just the right amount and just the right times. Right when... you're like, I want to see something pop off. It does pop off, so I like that. It's, in this volume as well, we get meaningful development of not only plot stuff, but also for the characters, which I think is obviously important, because if you watched the last video, I talked that Alita, while she does have some complexities about her, and that she is obviously able to handle herself, she does need some more depth, some more... work on different aspects of her character, and so I think they were starting to do that in this volume, which I appreciate. And then I also think they did a great job of introducing the new characters, even some that we only see for this volume, but specifically for Figure, I think they had a really good approach to having him as the focus, or at least the character that we kind of follow for a little bit of the story, because after we get closure of what happened to Alita from the events of the last volume, we don't necessarily need to see, Alita get in connection to Salem, get her new body, get her assignment, whatever, and then her getting onto the train, right? We just see what we need to see of her, and then we get to shift the focus to the new characters, let them breathe and develop, or at least let them get introduced to us and us getting connected to them. And so I think that really pays off, and it's good. And it leads to a nice reintroduction of Alita back at kind of full swing, but not necessarily her complete self, in the first half of the volume, but not necessarily the halfway point. I do love the Mad Max vibes I got from the bandits, so I really dig that part of the story, seeing them hit the train and having all their I guess, like vehicles and bikes and whatnot. It's short-lived, obviously, but I do like it nonetheless. And I think they do a great job of giving not only a different aesthetic, but a different level of threat to the bandits that were introduced at the beginning versus at the back half of the volume. Also, there is a good amount of showcasing that lets you have a chance to care more about them, but also see how they fit into the plot and why they're important. Primarily so in terms of like Colonel Basil. Am I screwing that up? No, that's his name. So, you know, seeing a little bit more of his backstory and his connection to it, and I think seeing the motivations, or at least the main goal of the Barjeks, really do make it more interesting to see the conflict that they have with Alita, but also, you know, again, how they're going to fit into the main plot. The themes and focuses they touch on in this volume are, again, not only well written, because I feel like all the themes so far that have been in the other volumes have been well written, but, you know, like we discussed in the last volume, they didn't hit, at least in that volume, I feel like they didn't hit the way they were supposed to. But in this volume, I think they did, which is a big plus over the last one, because, you know, I think it's just that, you know, you connect a little bit more of, you know, what Alita fell from in the last volume, and then now how she's back, but, you know, obviously not herself, because she's missing a lot of what she lost. Also, not really a thing specifically of what's in this volume, but more so what was not in this volume. Not seeing Destiny Nova was a major relief for me, and I like how we still get mentioning of him, so, you know, that gives time for this to build into not only a bigger moment later on, you know, a bigger confrontation, but also creating that tension and kind of paranoia of looming threat, you know, and confirms, you know, what I kind of said, or at least wanted in the last video. So I'm glad they're going in that direction of, you know, waiting off to show him again. Alita and Figure's chemistry is great, and I not only like Figure as a new character, but I think he makes a good companion for Alita. But I think their romance does feel a bit rushed still. You know, obviously they just met, so it doesn't make sense, you know, for it to be at least this far in my eyes. You know, a little flirty is fine, and, you know, the childish, like, I'm going to act the opposite of how I feel approach does work, especially in Alita's case, because we kind of seen that with Yugo, and just, you know, because she is kind of a kid still. So there's parts of it that work, some other parts that kind of overstep a little bit. Like, I think the multiple times where, like, Alita tries to kiss him is just maybe too much for me, or at least too sudden. It just doesn't feel like there was enough time there. But again, I like their chemistry, and I think it works still. So ultimately, not a big thing, not a bad thing either. But for my rating, I'm going to give this a pure ecstasy. I think it's a 10 out of 10. I really didn't have anything that I disliked about the volume. So for me, you know, I enjoyed it, read it really fast. And it's got everything. I think it's got the perfect balance of action, development, and plot progression. So, you know, more of a, I guess, side quest volume, but I think this will play into not only where they might end up in later volumes, but also obviously having that connection with the leader and Dusty, because that's going to be something that Alita is going to be going for later in the story, probably in the next volume, or I guess this arc. So we'll see. But with that being said, I'm going to shut up because this is already a super long video. So yeah, guys, I hope you sticked around for this time, or at least looked at the timestamp so you could pick out what you wanted to hear. But we'll be back for volume 7, hopefully next week. We got some other stuff in the works. I'm trying to edit more, and I'm still, you know, still not used to it, so I'm still slow, so apologies if stuff is going out slower, but hopefully this will be a step towards making some more polished content. But anyway, guys, that'll conclude everything. Obviously, there's going to be some links popping up on screen. You can check out the Alita coverage. We got some other book things going on, obviously discussions, movies, TV, you name it. So I'm going to get out of here. Hope you guys have a great day, and as always, peace, addicts.